Her wealth couldn't shield her from justice that day. Assaulting a decorated veteran at the Smithsonian crossed every line imaginable, but his response left millions in awe. What happened next changed museum security forever. The grand halls of the National Military Museum echoed with the footsteps of eager visitors on that fateful summer morning. Sunlight streamed through the massive glass dome, casting a reverent glow over the Medal of Honor exhibition, where centuries of American courage rested behind bulletproof glass. At the center of it all stood Marcus Henderson, a decorated Marine veteran turned honor guard, his pristine blue uniform reflecting decades of military tradition and personal sacrifice. The position was more than just a job for Marcus. After serving 3 tours in Afghanistan and earning multiple commendations, including the Silver Star for valor under fire, he viewed his role as a sacred duty, protecting and honoring the legacy of America's greatest heroes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. His ramrod-straight posture and unwavering focus had become legendary among regular visitors, who often whispered to their children about the guardian of valor who watched over the nation's most precious military artifacts. The exhibition hall itself was a testament to American bravery, housing over 200 years of military history. Glass cases displayed medals earned at Gettysburg, Normandy, Iwo Jima, and countless other battlefields where American heroes had given their last full measure of devotion. Each morning, Marcus would arrive early to walk through the empty hall, paying silent respect to the heroes whose stories he had memorized, whose sacrifices he had sworn to honor. That Wednesday started like any other. School groups shuffled through with their teachers explaining the significance of each display, their young voices hushed in natural reverence. Veterans paused to salute, some with tears in their eyes as they recognized medals identical to those earned by fallen comrades. Tourists snapped respectful photos from behind the velvet ropes, often pausing to read the powerful stories behind each award. The atmosphere was one of quiet reverence, until she arrived. The click of expensive heels announced her presence before anyone saw her. Vanessa Blackwood, fresh from closing a multi-million-dollar real estate deal downtown, swept into the exhibition hall like she owned it. Her designer outfit, a tailored Chanel suit and Christian Louboutin heels, and diamond-studded accessories screamed old money, but her behavior whispered new entitlement. She'd made her fortune flipping historic properties into luxury condos, earning both wealth and a reputation for dismissing tradition in favor of profit. "Is this all there is?" Her voice carried across the hushed space, drawing disapproving glances from other visitors. "I thought there'd be more action. It's just medals behind glass." She tapped away on her phone, barely glancing at the priceless artifacts surrounding her, each tap of her manicured fingers on the screen echoing like tiny thunderclaps in the reverent space. A small group of veterans who had been quietly discussing a Vietnam-era display turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. One of them, wearing a faded Marine Corps cap, shook his head slowly, his weathered hands clenching into fists at his sides. But Marcus remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward, embodying the discipline that had earned him his own medals on battlefields far from this peaceful hall. Vanessa's attention finally landed on Marcus. A smirk played across her perfectly painted lips as she raised her phone, recording herself for her 250,000 social media followers. "Look what I found, followers. A real-life statue. Let's see if we can make him move. Maybe we'll go viral today." Her voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real consequences for their actions. Several visitors shook their heads, some reaching for their own phones, sensing the situation was about to escalate. A museum docent, an older gentleman who had been leading a tour group through the World War II section, started moving in their direction, but Vanessa was faster. Her entire demeanor suggested someone used to being the center of attention, someone who viewed rules as mere suggestions for lesser people. "Hey, soldier boy," she called out, stepping closer to the rope line, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Don't you get tired of playing mannequin? Or is this the only job they could find for you?" Her laughter echoed off the marble walls, sharp and mocking, a sound completely at odds with the solemnity of the space. Behind her, a mother quickly covered her young daughter's ears, hurrying past the unfolding scene. The tension in the room rose palpably. A father quickly ushered his young children away, while an elderly veteran in a wheelchair gripped his armrests, knuckles white with restraint. Two teenage boys who had been joking earlier fell silent, suddenly aware they were witnessing something profound in its impropriety. Yet Marcus remained perfectly still, his face a mask of professional composure, though those who looked closely might have noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. Vanessa's eyes narrowed at the lack of response. Used to commanding attention in every room she entered, being ignored was not something she handled well. She stepped closer, her expensive perfume invading the solemn space, its sweet scent an unwelcome intrusion in the hallowed hall. "You know," she drawled, still recording, her phone held high to capture every moment. "My taxes probably pay your salary. The least you could do is acknowledge me." When Marcus continued his stoic vigil, something ugly flashed across her features. "Or maybe you're just not smart enough to understand basic courtesy? Did all that time in the sandbox scramble something up there?" The docent was now just a few feet away, opening his mouth to intervene, but Vanessa had already made her decision. In one fluid motion, she ducked under the velvet rope, crossing into the restricted space that hundreds of respectful visitors honored every day. The air in the hall seemed to freeze as she committed this ultimate transgression. What happened next would spark a national conversation about respect, service, and the consequences of unchecked entitlement. But at that moment, as Vanessa stepped into sacred ground with a smile that suggested the rules didn't apply to her, no one could have predicted just how dramatically her life was about to change. The atmosphere in the Medal of Honor exhibition hall crackled with tension as Vanessa Blackwood stood in the restricted area, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The sound echoed through the space like tiny gunshots, each step a fresh assault on the sanctity of the memorial. Behind her, phones recorded silently, their owners instinctively knowing they were witnessing something that would soon explode across social media. Well, Vanessa strutted around Marcus, her phone continuing to record as she circled him like a predator. The famous guardian of medals doesn't seem so intimidating up close. She reached out and ran a perfectly manicured finger along the sleeve of his uniform, examining the fabric with exaggerated interest. Department store quality at best. I guess the government really does cut corners everywhere. The elderly veteran in the wheelchair, a man named James Cooper who had earned his Purple Heart in Vietnam, slowly wheeled himself forward. His voice, though aged, carried the weight of authority earned in combat. "Young lady, that uniform represents something you clearly don't understand. Step back behind the line. Now." His words hung in the air, a veteran's command that would have earned immediate respect from anyone with an ounce of decency. But Vanessa merely laughed, turning to face her growing audience. "Oh, look, everyone. Another person who thinks a uniform makes them special." She gestured dramatically with her free hand, playing to her phone's camera. "Newsflash, it's 2025. These outdated displays of authority are just that. Outdated. We're paying for this museum. We should be able to interact with the exhibits and the props." Marcus remained motionless, but those closest to him noticed a subtle change. Though his posture stayed perfect, a new intensity had entered his eyes. It was the same look he'd worn in Afghanistan when protecting his unit from danger, alert, aware, and ready. His silence was no longer just protocol. It was the calm before a storm. Several museum visitors had gathered near the docent, who was now urgently speaking into his radio. A mother pulled her young son closer, whispering, "This is what disrespect looks like, Tommy. Never be like this." The boy nodded solemnly, his eyes wide as he watched the scene unfold. "Hey, everyone!" Vanessa's voice rose another octave as she positioned herself next to Marcus for a selfie. "Watch my followers count explode when I post this. Hanging out with G.I. Joe. Guess he's not so tough after all." She pressed against his side, the overwhelming scent of her perfume mixing incongruously with the crisp starch of his uniform. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A security guard finally appeared at the entrance to the hall, but before he could intervene, Vanessa decided to push for her viral moment. "Come on, soldier boy," she taunted, her voice dripping with mockery. "Your little act isn't fooling anyone. What are they paying you, minimum wage? I probably spend more on coffee in a day than you make in a month." The security guard started moving forward, but Vanessa was quicker. In a move that would soon be replayed millions of times across every social media platform, she raised her hand and delivered a sharp slap to Marcus's cheek. The crack of palm against skin echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze. Visitors gasped in unified shock. Someone dropped their phone. The elderly veteran in the wheelchair uttered a curse that hadn't passed his lips since Saigon. For a fraction of a second, even Vanessa seemed surprised by her own audacity, though she quickly covered it with a smirk. Then Marcus moved. It wasn't the reaction anyone expected. There was no anger, no retaliation, no loss of control. Instead, in one fluid motion that spoke of years of training, he took a single step back and raised his white-gloved hand in a crisp, formal salute. His eyes, now locked directly with Vanessa's, held not rage, but something far more unsettling. Disappointment mixed with resolve. His voice, when it came, filled the hall with the quiet authority of a battlefield commander. "Ma'am, you have just physically assaulted a federal officer in a restricted area of the Smithsonian Institution. You have desecrated a memorial to Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, and you have violated Title 18, Section 2199 of the United States Code." Vanessa's smirk faltered for the first time. Behind her, the main doors of the exhibition hall opened with a heavy thud. 2 U.S. Park police officers strode in, their faces set in professional masks of authority. The security guard who had called them moved to block the nearest exit. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa sputtered, finally lowering her phone. "Do you know who I am? I was just trying to make a fun video. You can't possibly—" "Ma'am," one of the park police officers cut her off, his voice brooking no argument. "Please place your phone on the ground and step away from the guard. You're under arrest for assault on a federal officer and violation of protected historical space." What happened next would be described by witnesses as both shocking and strangely satisfying. But as Vanessa Blackwood stood there, her designer outfit suddenly feeling like costume jewelry in a palace of true valor, she began to realize that her perfectly curated world of privilege was about to collide head-on with something far more powerful: justice. The next few minutes in the Medal of Honor exhibition hall unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of justice. As the park police officers approached Vanessa Blackwood, her carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she placed her phone on the ground, the device still recording what would soon become her most viral and humiliating moment. "This is absolutely absurd," she protested, her voice losing its earlier mockery, replaced by rising panic. "I'll have your badges for this. My attorney will—" She reached for her designer purse, but the female officer smoothly intercepted her hand. "Ma'am, please place your hands behind your back," the officer instructed firmly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The familiar Miranda rights echoed through the hall, made all the more dramatic by the historical setting. The crowd of witnesses had grown, their phones documenting every moment of Vanessa's downfall. Among them, James Cooper, the Vietnam veteran in the wheelchair, spoke up. "I've got it all recorded, officers. Every single second, from the moment she crossed the line to when she assaulted the guard." Several other visitors nodded, holding up their phones in solidarity. Marcus Henderson remained at his post, his bearing as professional as ever, though he had shifted slightly to give his official statement to a third officer who had arrived on scene. His words were measured and precise, reflecting his military training. The suspect crossed the security barrier at approximately 10:47 hours, made verbal threats, and proceeded to commit physical assault at approximately 10:52 hours. The museum's head of security arrived, a former FBI agent named Sarah Martinez, who quickly took control of the situation. "Clear the hall," she ordered, her voice carrying authority without aggression. "We need to process this scene properly." She turned to the gathered crowd. "If anyone has video footage of the incident, please provide your contact information to Officer Chen at the door. Your cooperation will be greatly appreciated." As visitors began filing out, many paused to shoot disgusted looks at Vanessa, who was now being escorted toward the exit, her Louboutin heels clicking much less confidently against the marble floor. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mommy, why did the mean lady hit the brave soldier?" The mother's response carried across the hushed space. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people forget that money can't buy respect or class." Several visitors nodded in agreement, and Vanessa's face flushed a deep crimson. Near the entrance, a group of school children who had witnessed everything stood with their teacher, a retired Army sergeant, who had been explaining the Medal of Honor's significance when the incident began. He seized the moment for an impromptu lesson. "Take note, kids. What you just saw was a contrast between two types of Americans, those who serve with honor and those who serve only themselves." As Vanessa was led through the museum's main hall, tourists and visitors parted like the Red Sea, many pulling out their phones to capture her walk of shame. Her carefully crafted image of wealth and privilege seemed to dissolve with each step. The designer suit that had commanded respect in corporate boardrooms now looked as superficial as a Halloween costume. Marcus's fellow guard, stationed at the World War II exhibition, caught his eye and rendered a subtle salute, a gesture of respect that spoke volumes. Throughout the building, other veterans who had been touring the museum stood at attention as Vanessa was escorted past, their silence more condemning than any words could have been. Outside, a small crowd had already gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of police vehicles in front of the museum's grand entrance. As Vanessa emerged into the bright sunlight, a tourist's child pointed and exclaimed, "That's the lady who hit the soldier! I saw it on TikTok already!" Indeed, the first clips of the incident were already spreading across social media like wildfire. Museum Karen and Dog Guardian of Valor were trending, with early videos gaining hundreds of thousands of views within minutes. The court of public opinion was in session, and the verdict was unanimous. Back inside, Marcus resumed his post with the same dignity and presence he had shown throughout the incident. A museum administrator approached him discreetly, offering to relieve him for the day, but Marcus declined with a slight shake of his head. "The medals still need their guardian, sir," he said quietly. "This changes nothing." As the excitement died down and regular museum operations resumed, visitors noticed something different about the atmosphere in the Medal of Honor Hall. There was a deeper sense of reverence, as if Vanessa's actions and Marcus's response had somehow made the meaning of the place even more profound. Parents began explaining to their children not just about the medals behind the glass, but about the living embodiment of honor who stood guard over them. The incident would soon explode across the internet, but for now, in this quiet aftermath, Marcus stood his watch. Behind him, the medals of America's greatest heroes gleamed in their cases, their stories of sacrifice and duty serving as silent witnesses to yet another battle. Not one fought with weapons, but with dignity against disrespect, honor against entitlement. Within hours of Vanessa Blackwood's arrest, the internet transformed into a digital courthouse, with millions serving as both jury and judges. The video of her confrontation with Marcus Henderson spread across platforms faster than breaking news, spawning countless memes, reactions, and heated discussions about privilege, respect, and the treatment of veterans in modern America. Guardian of Valor and the Museum Karen dominated Twitter's trending topics, while TikTok creators rushed to stitch and duet with the original footage. A particularly viral edit juxtaposed Vanessa's entitled behavior with Marcus's stoic response set to "God bless the USA." It garnered over 10 million views in just 3 hours. Military veterans began sharing their own stories of dealing with disrespectful civilians, creating a powerful narrative that resonated far beyond the initial incident. Professional athletes, celebrities, and politicians from both sides of the aisle united in condemning Vanessa's actions. NBA star LeBron Mitchell shared the video with the caption, "This is what real strength looks like. Not the person throwing hands, but the one showing restraint. Mad respect to our number guardian of valor. The post quickly became his most engaged content of the year. Meanwhile, Vanessa's carefully curated online presence crumbled like a house of cards. Internet sleuths quickly connected her to Blackwood Luxury Real Estate, her high-end property development company. Within hours, her company's Yelp and Google business pages were flooded with one-star reviews. Her professional Instagram account, once a showcase of multi-million-dollar property deals and luxury lifestyle posts, became a battlefield of angry comments and veteran supporters. Several major real estate firms publicly announced they were severing ties with Blackwood Luxury Real Estate. The National Association of Realtors issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. The behavior displayed in today's viral video stands in direct opposition to our values of respect, integrity, and community service. News channels picked up the story for their evening broadcasts, with one cable news anchor noting, "In an era of divided public opinion, it's remarkable to see such universal condemnation." Political pundits from across the spectrum found rare common ground in praising Marcus's restraint and professionalism, while criticizing Vanessa's entitled behavior. A deep dive by online investigators revealed this wasn't Vanessa's first brush with controversy. Old social media posts surfaced showing similar incidents of disrespect toward service workers, though none had escalated to physical assault. A former employee anonymously shared stories of toxic workplace behavior, painting a picture of someone who had let wealth erode their humanity. The National Military Museum's official social media accounts handled the situation with grace, posting a simple statement. "We stand firmly behind our honor guards and their commitment to preserving the dignity of our nation's military heritage. We thank the public for their overwhelming support and remind visitors that our exhibits deserve the utmost respect." Veterans organizations across the country seized the moment to educate the public. The American Legion shared a powerful video about the significance of the Medal of Honor and the sacred duty of those who guard such memorials. The video included interviews with Medal of Honor recipients who expressed their gratitude to Marcus for protecting the dignity of their award. Marcus Henderson himself became an overnight symbol of military virtue and restraint. His military record, already impressive, became public knowledge as fellow veterans shared stories of serving with him. A photograph of him receiving his Silver Star in Afghanistan went viral, accompanied by the citation describing how he had risked his life to save 3 wounded comrades under heavy fire. Yet Marcus remained humble. When reporters gathered outside the museum hoping for a statement, he simply said, "I was just doing my duty." The real heroes are the ones whose medals I'm privileged to guard. His words, delivered with quiet dignity, only enhanced his growing reputation as a model of military bearing and professionalism. The incident sparked broader discussions about respect for military traditions in modern society. Educational institutions reached out to the museum, requesting virtual tours for their students, specifically asking to learn about the Medal of Honor exhibition and its significance. Several universities began incorporating the video into their ethics and civics courses as a case study in citizenship and respect for national institutions. By evening, video clips from security cameras emerged, showing additional angles of the confrontation. These new perspectives only reinforced the public's support for Marcus, as they clearly showed his remarkable restraint in the face of escalating provocation. Body camera footage from the responding officers captured Vanessa's transformation from arrogant aggressor to stunned defendant, providing what one social media user called a masterclass in consequences. As night fell on the nation's capital, the incident had evolved from a viral moment into a cultural touchpoint. News anchors discussed the tale of 2 Americans, one representing service and sacrifice, the other entitlement and disrespect. Sociologists appeared on news programs, analyzing what the public's overwhelming response revealed about American values and the enduring respect for military service. The day's events would continue to reverberate through social media, traditional news outlets, and American culture at large. But for now, as millions shared, commented, and reflected on what they had witnessed, one thing became crystal clear. Society had drawn a line in the sand, and Vanessa Blackwood had picked the wrong side of history to stand on. The morning after the incident, Vanessa Blackwood faced the harsh fluorescent lights of a Washington, D.C. courtroom, her designer suit replaced by standard-issue courtroom attire. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the shell-shocked expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble in real time. The charges against her were more serious than she had initially assumed. The prosecutor, a former military JAG officer named Sarah Chen, read them aloud with precision. Assault on a federal officer, violation of protected historical space, disorderly conduct in a national museum, and disruption of a memorial site. Each charge echoed through the courtroom like a nail in the coffin of Vanessa's reputation. Her high-priced attorney, James Morrison, tried to spin the incident as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. But the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple videos from different angles, witness statements, and the crystal-clear security footage left no room for interpretation. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, watched the footage with a stoic expression that grew increasingly stern. "Your Honor," Morrison argued, "Ms. Blackwood is a respected businesswoman who has contributed significantly to the community. This was an isolated incident, a momentary lapse in judgment exacerbated by work stress and—" The prosecutor interrupted. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we have evidence suggesting this is part of a pattern of behavior." She proceeded to present screenshots of Vanessa's past social media posts, showing numerous instances of disrespecting service workers, security personnel, and even mocking a veterans parade. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was the day her actions finally caught up with her attitude. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Veterans in their service caps stood alongside ordinary citizens, many holding signs reading "Support our Guardian of Valor" and "Respect is not optional." Several Medal of Honor recipients had traveled to D.C. specifically to attend the hearing, their presence adding gravity to the proceedings. The judge's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Ms. Blackwood, stand." Vanessa rose on shaking legs, her expensive perfume unable to mask the nervous sweat that had broken out across her forehead. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many displays of disrespect, but few as calculated and shameless as yours." He continued, his words measured and heavy with purpose. "You didn't just assault a federal officer. You attempted to humiliate a decorated veteran for social media entertainment. You didn't just cross a physical line, you crossed every line of basic human decency. In doing so, you disrespected not only Mr. Henderson, but every service member who has ever stood watch over our nation's memorials." The sentence came down like a thunderbolt: 6 months in federal prison, a $250,000 fine to be donated to veterans organizations, 1,000 hours of community service at veterans facilities, and a lifetime ban from all Smithsonian properties. Additionally, she would be required to attend a comprehensive educational program about military history and the significance of the Medal of Honor. As the gavel fell, Vanessa's carefully maintained composure finally broke. Tears streaked her designer makeup as reality set in. Her attorney immediately announced their intention to appeal, but the judge's words weren't finished. "Ms. Blackwood, I suggest you spend less time planning appeals and more time reflecting on the path that brought you here." Meanwhile, across town at the National Military Museum, Marcus Henderson continued his duty with the same unwavering dedication. The number of visitors had tripled, many coming specifically to show their respect. Children approached with hand-drawn thank you cards, veterans rendered crisp salutes, and ordinary citizens simply nodded in appreciation as they passed. The museum had installed a new plaque near the Medal of Honor exhibition, reading, "This sacred space is protected by guardians who embody the values represented by the medals they watch over: honor, courage, and commitment." Below it, a smaller line added, "Respect for these values is not optional, it is our duty as Americans." In an unexpected turn of events, several of Vanessa's former business associates approached the museum with a proposal. They wanted to establish a foundation that would fund educational programs about military history and civic responsibility for school children. The first program would be titled, "The Guardian's Watch: Learning Respect Through Service." As evening approached and the museum prepared to close, An elderly Medal of Honor recipient who had witnessed the original incident returned. He wheeled himself up to Marcus and spoke softly. "Son, I earned this medal in Vietnam, but you showed more courage yesterday than I did in combat. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones where we must show restraint." Marcus remained at attention, but allowed himself a slight nod of acknowledgement. The Medal of Honor recipient continued. "You protected more than just medals yesterday. You protected what they represent. That's a different kind of valor, but valor nonetheless." The incident would be remembered not just as a viral moment or a cautionary tale about entitlement, but as a turning point in how society viewed the guardians of its sacred spaces. Vanessa Blackwood's name would fade into obscurity, but the lesson she inadvertently taught would be remembered for generations to come. 1 month after the incident that shook the National Military Museum, Vanessa Blackwood sat in a stark prison classroom, her orange jumpsuit a far cry from her former designer wardrobe. As part of her sentence, she was attending a mandatory course on military history and the significance of the Medal of Honor. Today's lecturer was none other than Colonel James Wright, a retired Marine and Medal of Honor recipient. "The medal you disrespected," Colonel Wright began, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "isn't just a piece of metal. Each one represents a moment when someone chose the lives of others over their own safety." He paused, making eye contact with Vanessa. "Much like how Marcus Henderson chose dignity over retaliation when you assaulted him." The transformation in Vanessa was becoming evident. The entitled smirk had vanished, replaced by a sobering awareness of her actions' impact. Her fellow inmates, many of whom had family members in the military, had made sure she understood the gravity of her offense. Every day, she watched news reports about how her actions had sparked a national conversation about respect, service, and privilege. Back at the museum, changes were already visible. Visitor behavior had shifted dramatically. Parents could be heard explaining to their children not just about the medals and their recipients, but about the importance of showing respect to those who serve. The velvet rope line that Vanessa had so casually crossed now featured a new sign. "Standing behind this line stands for respect." Marcus Henderson's story had taken on a life of its own. Military academies incorporated video of the incident into their training programs, using it to teach about composure under pressure. The Marine Corps created a new award for exceptional restraint and professionalism in challenging situations, unofficially dubbed the Henderson Honor. Educational institutions across the country began inviting veterans to speak about service, sacrifice, and the importance of national monuments. One high school principal noted, "The incident showed us that we weren't doing enough to teach our students about respect for military traditions. That changes now." Vanessa's former real estate empire continued to crumble. Her luxury properties were being sold off, with a significant portion of the proceeds, at the judge's direction, going to veterans organizations. Ironically, one of her most prestigious buildings was purchased by a veteran-owned business that transformed it into affordable housing for military families. The incident's viral footage had evolved into a powerful teaching tool. Social media platforms that had initially amplified the scandal now featured thoughtful discussions about privilege, respect, and the true meaning of service. Behavioral experts analyzed the video, pointing out how Marcus's restraint exemplified the highest standards of military bearing. In her prison cell, Vanessa received a letter that would change her perspective forever. It was from the widow of a Medal of Honor recipient, describing how her late husband had sacrificed his life saving his entire unit in Afghanistan. "The medal you mocked," the letter read, "represents thousands of such stories. Each one is sacred. Each one deserves reverence." The museum itself had become a symbol of resilience and dignity. Visitor numbers had doubled, with many coming specifically to pay their respects to Marcus and the values he represented. A new exhibition, Guardians of Honor, The Story Behind the Watch, detailed the history of those who protected America's military heritage. Marcus Henderson's impact extended far beyond the museum walls. Veterans organizations reported a surge in volunteers and donations. Young people, inspired by his example, showed increased interest in military service and civic duty. As one recruitment officer noted, Henderson showed that true strength isn't about power, it's about principle. 3 months into her sentence, Vanessa requested permission to make a public statement. Standing before cameras in her prison uniform, she spoke with genuine remorse. "I didn't just disrespect one guard that day. I disrespected every person who ever put on a uniform, every family who lost a loved one in service, and every American who understands the meaning of honor. No apology can undo that, but I hope my story serves as a warning to others." The media coverage of her statement was overshadowed by a ceremony at the White House, where Marcus Henderson received a civilian service medal for his exemplary conduct. In his brief acceptance speech, he remained characteristically humble. "I stand here representing every guard, every service member, and every American who understands that respect isn't a choice, it's a duty." As the year drew to a close, the National Military Museum added a small but significant addition to its Medal of Honor exhibition. Next to the guard post where Marcus stood his watch, a simple plaque read, "Honor is not just about the medals behind the glass. It's about the people who choose to serve, protect, and respect them. Let this space remind us that every act of service, whether on the battlefield or in our daily lives, deserves our utmost respect." The incident that began with an act of disrespect had transformed into a powerful lesson about honor, service, and consequences. While Vanessa Blackwood served her sentence, Marcus Henderson continued his watch, standing as a living reminder that true strength lies not in the power to retaliate, but in the courage to remain steadfast in the face of disrespect. 1 year after the incident that changed her life, Vanessa Blackwood stood once again before the National Military Museum. This time, there were no designer clothes, no phone in hand, and no trace of her former arrogance. Released from prison 2 months early for good behavior, she had specifically requested that her first act as a free woman be a return to the scene of her greatest mistake. The morning sun cast long shadows across the museum steps as she approached, her hands trembling slightly. She wore simple business attire, her once perfectly manicured nails now plain and practical. The security guard at the entrance recognized her immediately. Her face had become impossibly familiar over the past year, but instead of turning her away, he nodded solemnly. They had been notified she was coming. "The museum opens in 30 minutes, Ms. Blackwood," he said professionally. "Mr. Henderson is expecting you." The words hung in the air like a weight. This meeting had been arranged through proper channels, approved by both the museum administration and her probation officer as part of her rehabilitation process. Inside, the Medal of Honor exhibition looked exactly as it had that fateful day, yet everything felt different. The morning light streaming through the glass dome seemed to illuminate not just the medals, but the weight of history they carried. Marcus Henderson stood at his post as steadfast as ever, but today he was permitted to break protocol for a unique moment of reconciliation. Vanessa approached the velvet rope, the same line she had so casually crossed a year ago, and stopped respectfully behind it. The silence in the empty museum was profound. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of its former pretense. "Mr. Henderson, I spent 180 days in prison thinking about what I did, but it wasn't the prison sentence that changed me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It was the letter from Mrs. Chen, the widow of a Medal of Honor recipient. She invited me to have dinner with her family during my community service at the VA. Her husband died throwing himself on a grenade to save his unit. She showed me his medal, told me his story, and for the first time, I understood what these medals truly mean." Marcus maintained his professional bearing but turned slightly to acknowledge her presence. Vanessa continued, "I've spent the past year learning about sacrifice, honor, and respect. I've heard stories that will stay with me forever. Stories of young men and women who gave everything for others. Stories that these medals represent." From her simple handbag, she withdrew a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. The judge's sentence included a fine of $250,000. "I paid that, but it wasn't enough. I've sold everything. My company, my properties, my cars. All of it. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Guardian's Honor Foundation, with an endowment of $15 million. She placed the package carefully on a nearby bench. "This is the deed to my last property. It's being converted into a transition center for homeless veterans, because I finally understand that true worth isn't about what you own, it's about what you give back. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice measured and professional. Your actions that day disrespected everything these medals represent. But your actions since then honor the principles of redemption that many of these heroes fought to preserve. The museum director, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Ms. Blackwood, your foundation's first project has been approved. Starting next month, we'll be launching an educational program for schools about the Medal of Honor and its recipients. The program will include your story, both the mistake and the redemption. Vanessa nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I've requested to be part of the program, speaking to students about the consequences of disrespect and the importance of understanding our nation's military heritage. If my story can prevent even one person from making the same mistake, some good will have come from it. As the first visitors began filtering into the museum, Vanessa prepared to leave. But before she did, she turned to Marcus one last time. Thank you, she said simply, for showing me what real strength looks like. It's not about power or money or social media followers. It's about standing firm in your principles, even when faced with disrespect. She walked toward the exit, stopping briefly to look at the new plaque that had been installed. Respect is learned. Honor is earned. Both must be preserved. Below it was a small display that would soon include her story, not as a tale of shame, but as a testament to the transformative power of understanding and redemption. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen, casting the museum's marble columns in golden light. A group of school children were gathering for the day's first tour, their excited chatter filling the air. As Vanessa descended the steps, she overheard a young girl ask her teacher, "Is this where the brave guard stands?" The teacher's response carried on the morning air. Yes, and his story teaches us something very important, that sometimes the bravest thing isn't about what you do, but about what you choose not to do. Vanessa Blackwood walked away from the National Military Museum for the last time, leaving behind the person she had been and carrying with her the lessons that would define who she had become. Behind her, Marcus Henderson stood his eternal watch, guarding not just medals but the very principles that make redemption possible. 5 years after the incident that became a national teaching moment, the National Military Museum hosted a special exhibition titled Guardians of Honor: A Legacy of Respect. The ceremony marking its opening drew an unprecedented crowd, including military leaders, politicians, and civilians from across the country. Marcus Henderson, now the head of security training for all Smithsonian institutions, stood at attention as the ribbon was cut. His promotion had come with offers to leave his post, but he had chosen to remain a guard at the Medal of Honor exhibition 3 days a week, understanding that his presence had become part of the museum's living history. The new exhibition hall featured an interactive display about the incident that had transformed museum security protocols nationwide. Visitors could watch restored footage of the confrontation, followed by interviews with veterans, security personnel, and even former troublemakers who had learned valuable lessons about respect and dignity. What happened here 5 years ago wasn't just about one guard and one disrespectful person, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the museum's new director. It became a catalyst for a national conversation about respect, service, and the price of freedom. Today, we're seeing the fruits of that conversation. Statistics displayed on a digital wall told the story. Reported incidents of disrespect at military monuments had dropped by 78% nationwide. Applications for museum security positions from veterans had increased threefold. Most significantly, school programs about military history and civic responsibility had seen a 145% increase in student engagement. The Guardians Honor Foundation, started by Vanessa Blackwood, had expanded beyond its original mission. Now operating in all 50 states, it had helped establish veteran support centers, educational programs, and rehabilitation facilities. The foundation's most successful initiative was the Walk in Their Boots program, which connected troubled youth with veteran mentors. Vanessa herself had become an unlikely advocate for veteran causes. After completing her sentence and community service, she had dedicated her life to teaching others about respect and consequences. Her speaking engagements at schools and military bases drew large crowds, her story serving as a powerful reminder that redemption was possible through genuine remorse and positive action. The medal recipients I've met over the past 5 years taught me something profound, she shared during the exhibition's opening ceremony. Heroism isn't just about the big moments of sacrifice. It's about the small choices we make every day to show respect, to honor others, and to stand for something greater than ourselves. The incident had sparked changes far beyond the museum's walls. Police academies incorporated the footage into their training programs, using it to teach officers about maintaining composure under provocation. Business schools analyzed it in ethics classes. Social media companies developed new guidelines about filming and mocking security personnel. Perhaps most remarkably, a new tradition had emerged at the museum. Every year on the anniversary of the incident, visitors would leave small tokens of respect, challenge coins, flowers, and handwritten notes at Marcus's post. The gesture had spread to other military monuments across the country, creating what became known as the Guardian's Watch movement. Marcus's example had inspired a new generation of service members. Military recruiters reported that candidates often cited his dignity under pressure as an inspiration for enlisting. The Marine Corps had formally incorporated his story into their training about bearing and discipline, dubbing it the Henderson Standard. The museum itself had evolved. The Medal of Honor exhibition now included an honor guard selection program that was among the most rigorous in the nation. Veterans competed for the privilege of standing watch, seeing it as a continuation of their service. Each guard underwent extensive training not just in security procedures, but in the history of every medal and recipient they protected. Technology had changed too. Instead of signs warning against disrespect, the museum now featured augmented reality displays that allowed visitors to experience the stories behind each medal. When people approached the guard posts, their phones received automatic notifications about proper etiquette and the significance of the watch. "We've learned that respect can't just be demanded. It must be understood," explained Colonel James Wright during the exhibition's opening. What Marcus Henderson did 5 years ago wasn't just maintain his composure. He showed us that the true power of a uniform lies not in its authority, but in the principles it represents. As the ceremony concluded, a group of young museum guides, all veterans themselves, prepared for their first tours. They wore pins bearing the new museum motto, "Through understanding comes respect." Each had completed a training program that emphasized not just historical knowledge, but the kind of dignity under pressure that Marcus had demonstrated. The last display in the new exhibition showed a simple photograph: Marcus at his post, standing watch as he had done countless times before. Below it, a quote from a Medal of Honor recipient captured the enduring lesson of that fateful day. "Courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it roars in the heat of battle. Sometimes it stands silent in the face of disrespect. Both kinds of courage keep our nation strong." 10 years to the day after the incident that changed the face of museum security forever, a young woman in a crisp police academy uniform stood before the Medal of Honor exhibition. Her name was Sarah Blackwood, and the weight of her last name was both a burden and a motivation. As Vanessa Blackwood's daughter, she had lived through the aftermath of her mother's infamous actions, but had chosen to transform that legacy into something meaningful. "I was 15 when my mother disrespected that guard," Sarah shared with her fellow cadets gathered for a special training session. "I watched our family's reputation crumble, saw our wealth disappear, and initially I was angry at her, at the guard, at everyone. But then something unexpected happened. I witnessed my mother's genuine transformation." The National Military Museum had chosen this anniversary to launch its newest initiative, the Guardian's Legacy Program, a comprehensive training curriculum for law enforcement and security personnel nationwide. Sarah, now 25, had been invited as a keynote speaker, her unique perspective bridging the gap between past and present. Marcus Henderson, now in his final year before retirement, stood at his usual post. Though silver had crept into his hair, his bearing remained as impeccable as ever. He had turned down numerous promotions over the years, preferring to serve where he felt he made the most difference, standing guard over the medals that represented America's highest values. My mother's foundation has helped thousands of veterans, Sarah continued, her voice strong and clear. But for me, the most powerful lesson wasn't in the grand gestures or the millions donated. It was in the small moments, watching her spend evenings studying military history, seeing her cry while reading letters from veterans' families, observing her quietly standing in line like everyone else when visiting military monuments. The museum had evolved in ways no one could have predicted a decade ago. The original viral video of the incident, rather than being hidden away as a dark moment in history, had become a cornerstone of training programs across the country. But now, it was accompanied by years of follow-up material showing the power of redemption and the importance of understanding military traditions. Today, I'm announcing a new chapter in this story, Sarah revealed. The Guardian's Honor Foundation, in partnership with the National Police Academy, is launching a scholarship program for children of veterans to enter law enforcement. We're calling it the Henderson Initiative, because true authority comes not from power, but from dignity and respect. Marcus, permitted to break protocol for this special occasion, stepped forward to shake Sarah's hand. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, but unlike the viral video of a decade ago, these images would represent healing and progress rather than conflict and disrespect. The ceremony took an unexpected turn when Sarah shared a personal story. Last month, while cleaning out some old boxes, I found my mother's phone, the one she used that day. It still had the original video she never got to post. But more importantly, it had something she recorded later that night in her holding cell. With her permission, I'd like to share it. The audience fell silent as the screen displayed Vanessa Blackwood, sitting alone in detention, her makeup streaked with tears. I don't know if anyone will ever see this. Her recorded voice trembled. But I need to say it. Today I became the worst version of myself, and in doing so, I met someone who represented the best of America. To that guard, I'm sorry. To every veteran, every service member, every person who understands respect in a way I failed to, I'm sorry. If I ever get the chance, I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. Sarah continued. My mother kept that promise. And today, I'm making one of my own. When I graduate from the academy, I've requested to serve as a security officer at this very museum. Because some posts are more than jobs. They're bridges between who we were and who we can become. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new permanent installation. A wall of screens showing a continuous loop of moments of honor, security footage from museums and monuments across the country where guards had displayed exceptional dignity and restraint in the face of disrespect. Marcus Henderson's incident led the sequence, but it was now one of hundreds, each telling its own story of quiet strength. As visitors filed past the exhibition that afternoon, they noticed something unique. Standing at attention beside Marcus Henderson was a newly graduated museum guard completing her first day of duty. Her name tag read, Officer Sarah Blackwood, and her presence represented something powerful, the idea that from our worst moments can come our greatest opportunities for growth. A young boy, no more than 10, looked up at the two guards and asked his father, Dad, why are there two of them today? The father smiled, understanding the deeper significance of what he was witnessing. Because, son, sometimes the best way to guard our history is to show that people can change it for the better. 20 years had passed since that fateful day at the National Military Museum. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus Henderson prepared for his final watch. After 2 decades of unwavering service, the man whose dignity had changed a nation was about to stand his last guard over the Medal of Honor exhibition. The museum had organized a special ceremony, but Marcus, true to his nature, had requested something simpler. The medals are the heroes, he had insisted. I'm just their guardian. Nevertheless, hundreds had gathered to witness this historic changing of the guard, including military leaders, politicians, and countless visitors whose lives had been touched by his example. Vanessa Blackwood, now in her 60s, sat quietly in the audience. Her hair had turned gray, and her face showed the lines of time. but her eyes reflected a peace that had come from 2 decades of dedicated service to veterans' causes. The Guardian's Honor Foundation she had established had grown into a billion-dollar organization, operating in 15 countries and supporting military families worldwide. "When I watch him stand there," Vanessa whispered to her daughter Sarah, now a veteran museum guard herself, "I'm reminded that sometimes our worst mistakes can lead to our greatest purpose." Sarah, who had risen to become the head of museum security training, squeezed her mother's hand in understanding. The exhibition hall had evolved over the years. Interactive displays now allowed visitors to experience the stories behind each medal through augmented reality. Yet the core remained unchanged. The quiet dignity of the guards who stood watch over America's highest military honors. The Henderson Protocol for handling disruptive visitors had become standard training at museums worldwide. As Marcus took his position one last time, a group of young recruits stood at attention nearby. They represented the newest class of museum guards, each personally selected through the rigorous program that Marcus had helped develop. Among them stood James Chen, the grandson of Mrs. Chen, the Medal of Honor widow whose letter had first touched Vanessa's heart 2 decades ago. The ceremony began with an unexpected announcement. The Smithsonian Institution had created a new position, Curator of Guard Heritage. Marcus would become its first holder, ensuring that the traditions and values he had embodied would be preserved for future generations. 20 years ago, the museum director began, a moment of disrespect became a catalyst for change. Today, we don't just guard medals, we guard the values they represent. And no one has embodied those values more than Marcus Henderson. A timeline display near the entrance told the story, the viral video that had sparked outrage, the transformation of a privileged woman into a humble servant of veterans' causes, the creation of educational programs that had reached millions, and the countless small moments of dignity that had followed in their wake. As Marcus prepared to step away from his post for the final time, something unprecedented occurred. The assembled crowd, which included 12 Medal of Honor recipients, rose as one and rendered a silent salute. The gesture, spanning generations and backgrounds, acknowledged that some forms of service transcend the battlefield. Sarah Blackwood stepped forward, representing both her own journey and the institution's future. 20 years ago, my mother's actions could have sparked a cycle of anger and retaliation. Instead, thanks to Mr. Henderson's dignity, they sparked a revolution of respect. The museum unveiled its newest edition, a permanent exhibition titled The Guardian's Watch. It chronicled not just the infamous incident, but the 2 decades of positive change that had followed. Interactive displays showed how one moment of restraint had rippled out to affect military monuments and museums around the world. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying the same quiet authority it had held for 20 years. "When I first stood watch here, I thought I was guarding medals. Over time, I realized I was guarding something far more precious, the values these medals represent. Honor isn't just about moments of dramatic courage, it's about the quiet dignity we show in our daily choices." As he prepared to leave, Marcus faced one final surprise. The Medal of Honor Recipient Society had created a new civilian award, the Henderson Medal for Distinguished Public Service. He would be its first recipient, but more importantly, it would be presented annually to civilians who demonstrated extraordinary dignity in public service. The ceremony concluded with a powerful gesture. As Marcus stepped away from his post for the last time, 100 veterans, including Sarah Blackwood, simultaneously took position at guard posts in 100 museums across the country. Each wore a small pin bearing Marcus's motto, "Dignity under fire." Vanessa Blackwood, watching her daughter stand watch, reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Sometimes, she mused to those nearby, our greatest failures can lead to our greatest redemptions. All it takes is someone strong enough to show us a better way. As the sun set on Marcus Henderson's final watch, its rays caught the medals in their cases, creating a dance of light that seemed to salute his service. The man who had turned a moment of disrespect into a legacy of honor finally allowed himself a small smile. His watch was ending, but his example would stand guard forever. 30 years after the incident, on a bright spring morning in 2025, a young museum guard stood watch at the Medal of Honor exhibition. Her name was Maria Henderson, and she was Marcus Henderson's granddaughter. The world had changed dramatically in 3 decades. Holographic displays had replaced traditional glass cases, and visitors now wore augmented reality glasses that brought each medal's story to life. But some things remained constant: the importance of honor, respect, and the sacred duty of standing watch. The original incident that had made her grandfather famous was now taught in schools as part of American history courses. The viral video, preserved in the Library of Congress, had been viewed by billions. But for Maria, the story had always been personal. She had grown up hearing it at family dinners, not as a tale of confrontation, but as a lesson about the power of dignity to transform lives. Marcus Henderson had passed away 5 years earlier, but his legacy lived on in ways no one could have predicted. The Henderson Protocol had become international standard for security personnel at cultural institutions worldwide. The Guardian's Honor Foundation, still actively led by an aging but energetic Vanessa Blackwood, had established training centers in 50 countries. Today was special. The museum was unveiling its newest wing, the Henderson Center for Civic Dignity. The centerpiece was an AI-powered interactive exhibition that allowed visitors to experience historical moments where dignity and restraint had changed the course of events. The original confrontation between Marcus and Vanessa served as the opening chapter. Sarah Blackwood, now superintendent of all Smithsonian security operations, stood beside Maria at the ceremony. Though her hair had grayed, she carried herself with the same purpose that had driven her to follow in her mother's footsteps of redemption. "Your grandfather," she told Maria, "taught us that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all." The ceremony drew an unprecedented crowd. Among them was 90-year-old Vanessa Blackwood, who insisted on attending despite her advanced age. She moved slowly with a walker, but her eyes remained sharp and clear. When she saw Maria in her guard uniform, tears welled up in her eyes. "Standing there," Vanessa said softly, "you look just like him. Same bearing, same dignity." She reached into her bag and pulled out something that drew gasps from those nearby. Her original phone from that fateful day, preserved all these years. "The museum asked me to donate this for the new exhibition. It seems fitting that you should be the one to place it in its display case." As Maria accepted the phone, a remarkable moment unfolded. Every guard in the museum, over 100 men and women, spontaneously stood at attention. Many were graduates of the Henderson Guard Academy, an elite training institution that combined military precision with conflict resolution and cultural awareness. The new wing featured something unprecedented: a real-time global map showing every cultural institution that had adopted the Henderson Protocol. Thousands of points of light sparkled across continents, each representing a place where dignity and respect were actively guarded. The map updated constantly as new institutions joined the network. A special display honored the Guardians line, the velvet rope that Vanessa had crossed 30 years ago. It had become a symbol so powerful that similar lines at museums worldwide were now known as Henderson lines, each representing not just a physical boundary, but a moral one. The ceremony reached its emotional peak when Maria, standing at her grandfather's former post, received an unexpected honor. The Congressional Medal of Honor Society announced the creation of the Marcus Henderson Civilian Courage Award, recognizing individuals who demonstrated extraordinary restraint and dignity in challenging situations. Vanessa Blackwood, assisted by her daughter Sarah, stood to make her final public speech. 30 years ago, I crossed a line thinking my privilege gave me the right. What I found on the other side wasn't just consequences, it was a calling. Marcus Henderson didn't just teach me about respect. He showed me that true strength lies in the power to transform ourselves. As the ceremony concluded, Maria assumed her watch position, standing exactly where her grandfather had stood 3 decades earlier. The original medals, though now augmented by technology, still gleamed in their cases. But they were no longer just symbols of military valor. They had become testaments to the power of dignity to change hearts and minds. A young visitor, probably no more than 10, approached Maria with a question. "Is it true that your grandfather was the guard from the famous story?" Maria smiled gently, maintaining her professional bearing. "Yes, but he would want you to remember something more important. It's not about who stands guard, but what we're guarding. These medals represent the best of human courage, and sometimes that courage is as simple as choosing dignity over anger." As the sun set on this historic day, the lights of the new Henderson Center cast a warm glow across the exhibition hall. Maria Henderson stood her watch, carrying forward a legacy that had grown far beyond one incident to become a global movement for dignity and respect. The world had changed in countless ways, but the power of quiet strength to transform lives remained eternal. 50 years had passed since the incident that changed museum security forever. The year was 2075, and the National Military Museum was hosting its golden anniversary commemoration of what had become known simply as the Henderson moment. The world had transformed dramatically. Holographic guides led visitors through virtual reconstructions of historic battles, and quantum preservation fields protected the precious metals. But at the heart of it all, a human guard still stood watch. Today was particularly special because of an unprecedented gathering. 3 generations of Hendersons and Blackwoods stood together in the exhibition hall. Maria Henderson, now the Global Director of Cultural Heritage Protection, stood beside her daughter Elena, who had followed in the family tradition of guard service. Beside them, 95-year-old Sarah Blackwood sat in her wheelchair, her eyes still bright with purpose. The occasion marked the opening of a new permanent installation, a century of honor, from Civil War to cyber defense. The exhibition traced the evolution of military valor from traditional battlefields to modern digital warfare. At its center stood the original Medal of Honor display where Marcus Henderson had made his stand half a century ago. "My grandfather never wanted to be famous," Maria addressed the assembled crowd. "He used to tell me that fame was the enemy of duty. But what happened here 50 years ago wasn't about fame. It was about something timeless, the power of dignity to change hearts." The ceremony featured a groundbreaking technological tribute. Using advanced AI and historical records, a holographic recreation of Marcus Henderson stood at his post, perfectly capturing his bearing and presence. Next to him, in a powerful symbol of reconciliation, stood a hologram of Vanessa Blackwood from her later years, when she had dedicated her life to veterans' causes. Sarah Blackwood, who had continued her mother's work with the Guardians Honor Foundation, revealed something that had been kept secret for decades. "My mother left a sealed letter with instructions to open it 50 years after the incident. Today, we share its contents with the world." The letter, displayed on massive holographic screens, began, "To those who guard our treasures in the future, what you protect is not just medals or monuments. You guard the very essence of human dignity. My greatest mistake became my life's greatest teacher, showing me that true strength lies not in the power to dominate, but in the courage to stand firm in your principles." The impact of that day had rippled far beyond museum security. The Henderson Protocol had evolved into a global standard for conflict resolution, taught in schools and adopted by peacekeeping forces worldwide. The simple act of standing one's ground with dignity had inspired a revolution in how society handled confrontation. Elena Henderson, representing the 3rd generation, stepped forward to make a surprising announcement. "Today, we're launching the International Henderson Institute for Dignity and Conflict Resolution. This virtual reality training center will allow security personnel worldwide to experience historical moments of crisis and learn from how they were handled with dignity." The Institute's first simulation would recreate the famous confrontation, allowing trainees to experience both perspectives, the guard's unwavering dignity and the aggressor's journey to redemption. But it would also include hundreds of other examples from the past 50 years where the Henderson Protocol had prevented escalation and promoted understanding. A touching moment occurred when a group of veteran guards, some well into their 80s, formed an honor cordon. Among them were people who had been inspired by Marcus's example to join museum security services across the world. They stood at attention as Sarah Blackwood was wheeled between them, each rendering a perfect salute to the woman whose family's transformation symbolized the power of change. The ceremony reached its emotional peak with the revelation of a time capsule that Marcus Henderson had prepared before his death. Inside was his original uniform from that day, perfectly preserved, along with a handwritten note. To those who stand watch in the future, remember that what you guard is not just history, but humanity's capacity for growth. Every moment of restraint is a victory for dignity. As the day drew to a close, Elena Henderson assumed the watch position of her grandfather and mother before her. The Medal of Honor display, though now enhanced by technology, remained fundamentally unchanged, a testament to valor that required human guardianship. Nearby, the holographic Marcus stood his eternal watch, a reminder that principles outlive people. Sarah Blackwood, preparing to leave, paused to touch the velvet rope that her mother had crossed so long ago. "You know," she said to Elena, "some boundaries exist not to restrict us, but to remind us of who we can become when we choose respect over arrogance." As visitors filed out, a small girl lingered, staring at the hologram of Marcus Henderson. "Will there always be guards here?" she asked her mother. Elena, overhearing, answered with quiet pride. "As long as there are medals to protect and values to uphold, there will always be those who stand watch. Because guarding honor isn't just a job, it's a promise we make to the future." The sun set on 50 years of transformed lives, but the legacy lived on in every guard who stood watch, in every moment of choosing dignity over confrontation, and in the countless lives touched by one man's unwavering commitment to duty and honor. 100 years had passed since the day a single act of dignity changed the course of countless lives. The year was 2125, and the National Military Museum had become more than just a building. It was a living monument to the power of respect, restraint, and redemption. On this centennial anniversary, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The great-great-grandchildren of both Marcus Henderson and Vanessa Blackwood stood together in the newly renovated Medal of Honor Pavilion. The world around them had transformed beyond recognition. Quantum fields preserved artifacts, AI docents shared stories, and virtual reality allowed visitors to experience historical moments firsthand. Yet at the heart of it all, a human guard still stood watch, carrying forward a century-old tradition. Thomas Henderson, a young museum guard following his family's legacy, stood at the exact spot where his great-great-grandfather had faced that pivotal moment. Beside him, Alexandra Blackwood Chen, the CEO of the now Global Guardians Legacy Corporation, represented the extraordinary journey of her own family from infamy to redemption. "A century ago," Alexandra addressed the gathered crowd, "two families were forever linked by a moment of conflict that transformed into a legacy of understanding. Today, we don't just commemorate that moment, we celebrate 100 years of its ripple effects across human society." The centennial celebration unveiled something unprecedented. Using advanced temporal scanning technology, scientists had recreated the exact atmospheric conditions, light patterns, and even the subtle sounds of that fateful day in 2025. Visitors could now experience the historic moment with all their senses, feeling the tension in the air, hearing the whispered reactions of the crowd, understanding viscerally what it meant to stand firm in the face of disrespect. But the most powerful revelation came from the Guardian's archive, a century of collected stories, each documenting how the Henderson moment had influenced conflict resolution worldwide. From playground disputes to international crises, the principle of dignified restraint had repeatedly transformed potential violence into opportunities for understanding. The Henderson Protocol, now embedded in global peacekeeping doctrine, had evolved into something its originator could never have imagined. Conflict resolution centers on every continent used advanced simulations based on that first incident to train new generations in the art of dignified response. The simple act of standing one's ground with honor had become a cornerstone of human interaction. A holographic timeline spiraled through the exhibition hall, showing key moments across the decades. The formation of the Guardians Honor Foundation, the establishment of the International Institute for Dignified Response, the adoption of Henderson principles in global education, and countless small moments where dignity had prevailed over discord. Thomas Henderson, maintaining his watch position, shared a profound reflection. My great-great-grandfather never sought recognition. He simply did what he believed was right. But in doing so, he showed us that sometimes the quietest actions echo the loudest through time. Alexandra unveiled the Centennial Initiative, a worldwide network of heritage protection centers, each dedicated to preserving not just artifacts, but the principles of respect that had grown from that single moment. We stand here, 100 years later, not as descendants of adversaries, but as partners in preserving humanity's noblest qualities. The ceremony reached its emotional peak with the activation of the Centennial Arch, a quantum-engineered monument that would preserve the complete emotional and historical resonance of the Henderson moment for future generations. Within its field, visitors could experience not just the physical reality of that day, but the deeper currents of human dignity that had transformed a moment of conflict into a century of progress. As the day drew to a close, something extraordinary occurred. Security guards from museums, monuments, and cultural sites worldwide participated in a synchronized moment of stillness, a global tribute to the power of standing firm in one's principles. For 1 minute, millions of guards across Earth and its colonies stood in perfect silence, embodying the dignity that had become their profession's hallmark. The final act of the Centennial was deeply personal. Thomas Henderson and Alexandra Blackwood Chen together unveiled a simple plaque that would mark the spot for the next 100 years. It read, "On this spot, humanity learned that true strength lies not in the power to strike, but in the courage to stand firm in dignity. May the next century find us worthy of this legacy." As the crowds departed, a young child approached Thomas at his post. "Will people still remember this story in another 100 years?" she asked innocently. Thomas smiled, maintaining his professional bearing as he replied, "As long as there are those who choose dignity over anger, respect over arrogance, and understanding over conflict, this story will never truly end. Because it's not just history, it's a promise we renew every time we choose to stand with honor." The sun set on a century of transformation, but the watch continued. In museums and monuments across the galaxy, guards stood their posts with quiet dignity, each one a testament to the enduring truth that had emerged from a single moment, that in the space between action and reaction lies the power to change not just a moment, but the very course of human understanding. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.